Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to another episode of my F1 22 My Team career mode. This is episode number 41 today for the Australian Grand Prix in Season 3. If you guys did miss the previous one at the Saudi Arabian GP, then be sure to go check that one out before you see this one, because that was an absolute utter madness. The upset of the century, I guess, in My Team career mode terms, because, well, I still don't quite know how he did it, but spoiler alert, at the wheel of this car, which is a bare bones, very barren launch car from a bankrupt team, Sebastian bloody Vettel, the former four-time world champion, has won a race in our team already and won the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. It was a classic old Seb performance. He broke the DRS, he got away and didn't allow anyone to chase him down. And it means after 2 rounds, I know it's very, very early days, you really can't tell how the championship's going to pan out after 2 rounds, but this early on, for Vettel to be leading the standings and for our team to be top ahead of teams like Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, the reigning champs, McLaren, who I thought were going to be so strong, but they're kind of, for all intents and purposes, floundering in P6 and not making the most of what is clearly a quick car on Saturday at least, and the same for Mercedes, and to be fair as well, Red Bull. It's been an absolutely extraordinary start to the season and an amazing one for us, given the context of where our team is. Our team is still very much in debt. We can't upgrade the car. We haven't upgraded the car since the start of the season. Now, we've been lucky with the AI teams having minimal upgrades so far. I mean, into Bahrain, we knew where they stood, but then into Saudi Arabia, hardly any of them upgraded. I think the only teams that did were Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri with minor upgrades. So we got lucky that basically no one improved and we could keep the same relative performance levels from Bahrain to Saudi Arabia. And as we stated, Saudi Arabia has always been a much better race for the My Team and for us in general as well, but clearly Sebastian Vettel as well loving it, because as long as you get a good setup balance, you can have actually a pretty good performance. But now we go to Albert Park for the Australian Grand Prix, and that is going to be a whole different kettle of fish. I think we are potentially going to get caught out a little bit if teams make upgrades, and they have made upgrades. Red Bull, potentially after not making the most of their quick car on Saturday, brought upgrades to maybe rectify that in the race, and they become the leaders on the R&D chart. You can see McLaren make actually quite a hefty step to try and bridge the gap to Mercedes and Red Bull, and they'll definitely be hoping that finally they can score some solid points with both their drivers, with Lando and Pierre Gasly. And you've got to say, in comparison to any other upgrades, that's the biggest leap forward by any team. So I think we need to watch out for McLaren at the sharp end. But in terms of the region where we'll be in, well, now we're behind Alfa Romeo as well. So we are the 7th best team on the grid on paper. Obviously, I know we've alluded to this scaling of, look at this Season 2 graph, look at where Season 3 is. The scaling is so minuscule. So if we looked at this chart at Season 2 scaling, you'd be probably saying Ferrari, Alpine, Alpha, and ourselves and AlphaTauri were all pretty much on top of each other and on the same bit of the chart. So in reality, it's still going to be very fine, and the drivers will make a bit of a difference in that very tight midfield pack or the lower end of the points. But it's still a bit of a statement that we're the 7th best team on paper. That's already showing the signs of the decline with other teams upgrading. So we better hope we can get it out of this debt as quickly as possible to turn back on those facilities and come back at them with some upgrades of our own. And with that, now we're into Q1 on the Saturday, still really reveling as a team from what Sebastian Vettel was able to do at Jeddah, winning a Grand Prix in this car. But I don't think I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't think Vettel should get ahead of himself, and the team shouldn't as well, because that was a very different circuit to Albert Park. And as I said, a couple of teams bringing upgrades, it's going to mean that we do get pushed down the order, and there's less opportunity to maybe break into those positions we were at Saudi Arabia. Q1 starts off quite strong though, P7 and 8. If we were to finish here in qualifying on the grid, I'll be very, very happy about that, because we're beating out one Haas, a Mercedes of Hamilton, Albon in the Red Bull, but I'm sure those guys have a bit more pace to pick up. Oscar Piastri in his home GP almost gets knocked out and gets embarrassed in Q1, but he makes it through into Q2. It looks like Alpine with Sergio Perez look pretty damn strong, and Sainz as well, to be fair, top in the session. He got a very solid podium for Repsol Haas last time out, so I think, very curious to see what they can do, and it's just such an interesting dynamic, because you now have Haas Alpine, Ferrari are back in the mix, and then you've got McLaren, who are kind of already ruffling the feathers of Red Bull and Mercedes. So there are a lot of teams. There are actually too many teams vying for what are only 10 positions for points. But also our job already gets a bit easier, because technically one of the teams that's just ahead of us in the R&D chart, Alfa Romeo, they had a howler in that Q1. I don't know what happened. Bottas was last place, so much for those upgrades making an improvement. I mean, as we've seen in real life, sometimes upgrades can make your car worse, but generally in the game that's not the case. So I don't know what went on for them in that first part of qualifying, but that's 2 less cars then to worry about in this Q2 session. Like I said, there are so many cars vying for the top 10 spots in qualifying, let alone the race. So this is going to be a bit more of a challenge. I don't think we have the same pace as we do around Saudi Arabia, but in Q1 we were P7 and 8, so let's see what we can do early doors, P2 and P3, but plenty of drivers yet to set times. But we are ahead of Verstappen and Albon. That was early days, but now here we are then into the final seconds of Q2, and we're starting our flying lap. The checker flag will fall in the middle of our lap, and we're P7 and 8. Now it's 8 and 9, and all of a sudden, as we enter Q3, with the second laps coming in, we're down to P13. I don't know where Vettel is at the moment. I think a little bit further ahead potentially, but Albon in the Red Bull is down in P16, so you've got to say we might even be pushed down to P15, and there you go. We are. Albon goes through to the top 10. We're down to P15, and we've hardly improved on the lap. Only through the last 2 corners do we gain 2 tenths to catapult us up into only P12. Sebastian Vettel, P11. Both of us knocked out in Q2 once again. So it's a crash back down to reality, and it's the same sort of scene we saw at the Bahrain GP, kind of showing that Jeddah was a very unique situation. It's a circuit where as long as you're good in the straights and okay enough in the corners, you can really make a difference as a driver. Here, though, the car plays a bit more of a factor. The Red Bulls, McLarens, Mercedes are through. Only one Ferrari. This time it's Leclerc that gets through, not Piastri, one of the home favourites. Perez in the Alpine, and Haas of Carlos Sainz, very strong. And then Yuki Tsunoda as well. That's a massive performance, and that's a bit embarrassing for our team to be outdone by an AlphaTauri, but he's done very, very well to be there in the top 10. And yeah, I just could not find any more time on that second lap, and to be fair, myself and Vettel very closely matched, so this is where the car is potentially, so we're going to have to try and make the most of it from being best of the rest outside the top 10. Unfortunately, there's no more tyre rule to help us out, but that won't matter because there's actually some rain forecast for tomorrow's race on Sunday, so that's going to make this entire thing even spicier. Let's go to the grid.
Welcome to the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne for what no doubt will be an intense day of racing. We're a stone's throw from the enormous Port Phillip Bay for today's race at the 3.28-mile Albert Park circuit. It's a bumpy racing surface here, and the 14 corners could prove especially difficult in the wet conditions. So watch out for a safety car at some point during this Grand Prix. It's time to take a look at our starting grid for today's race. Max Verstappen put in a fantastic lap yesterday, and he'll start from pole position. And Lando Norris lines up alongside. As we continue through the rest of the grid today, we have Gasly, Russell, Alex Albon, and Hamilton, Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, and Yuki Tsunoda, Vettel, the owner-driver, Mick Schumacher, and Ocon, Oscar Piastri, Théo Pourchaire, Liam Lawson, and Robert Schwartzman, Drugovich, Stroll, Magnussen, and Valtteri Bottas begins the race from the back of the grid. And with lights out just moments away, it's time to go down to the track. It's not going to be plain sailing for our drivers today, although with the sky falling as it is, perhaps sailing isn't too far from the truth. Natalie Pinkham, good to have you with us here today. Your thoughts?
It is a touch damp, isn't it? As a driver, there are 3 big things to worry about when racing in these conditions: standing water, tyre temperature, and visibility. Judging distance to the cars around you is really tricky when you're driving through the vast amounts of spray that these wet weather Pirelli tyres kick up.
So Albon's streak of pole positions has come to an end, but that won't end Red Bull's streak with Verstappen on pole. Again, a very strong qualifying for the McLaren boys, so let's see if they can actually convert it this time with the upgrades they made. Perhaps so. Maybe the race pace is going to be that much better that they can actually do even better than where they've qualified. The Mercs looking pretty decent. And for us, well, we're here P12 and 11, and there is clearly a decent amount of rain here in the air as we're all on intermediate. So for us, it'd be trying to snap at the heels of, the likes of Tsunoda, Carlos Sainz, Piastri in the Ferrari, and Perez in the Alpine. And then from then on, I don't know if we can go much further than that, to be honest. If you look at the pace of the car over one lap, and generally speaking in the wet, I don't fancy ourselves catapulting ourselves up the grid, but you never know. But first and foremost, try to snap at the heels of those last top 10 positions and go forwards rather than backwards from P12 and 11, the final row outside the top 10. It's been a mega start to the season. Extraordinary. Sebastian Vettel won last race. I don't think you'll be able to say the same thing again, but you never know. Never say never in Formula 1. As we go to 5 red lights for the Australian Grand Prix as we're underway in very, very wet conditions. It's a gingerly start for us, but actually a pretty decent one then in the second phase of acceleration versus Sebastian Vettel, our teammate. Into turn 1 though, very tight at the apex. Vettel squeezes us and we're unable with confidence to plant the power, and Seb gets the better of us. Can we go down the inside there? There's some fighting going on and we nearly made contact with Sebastian. Not going too well there, and once again we're pinched out by Vettel. Bit of snap of oversteer. Piastri sees his chance and he actually sends it down the inside, gets the elbows out and punts us wide, and now we're just about catching the car, going opposite lock into the right-hander. Schumacher's got past us as well as we went off circuit, so a very poor start for us down in P14, trying to wrestle this car in a straight line. My setup is generally leaning towards the dry, so that's potentially not helping the situation, on top of the fact that our car just isn't performing as well around this circuit as the other teams around us. But in the hands of Vettel, he's actually had a lot of confidence on these opening laps, so much so that he's going to go for a dive bomb down the inside of not one but 2 cars. Tries to get Tsunoda and Sainz in the same move. Gets Tsunoda, can't get the job done on Carlos Sainz, but is up into the top 10. So you got to say that race win definitely has reignited Sebastian Vettel, and his confidence and focus is super high with the moves he's making and how well he's done that opening lap. Verstappen still leads the way though from pole position. Gasly now in second place ahead of Lando Norris, and Verstappen goes wide at turn 1, and Gasly is right on their heels. The McLarens are nose to tail, 2 and 3. This is a much better start for McLaren, and they'll be hoping they can continue this pressure the entire race as they try and topple Verstappen. Russell behind in P4 as Schumacher's slow at the same right-hander where we had issues on lap 1. We're able to pass him as he just had a bit of a tank slapper. They went so slow on the exit at the corner, and we actually made a little bit of contact, so I just checked there was no front wing damage. Little love tap versus Schumacher to get by into P13, and slowly but surely trying to get to grips with this car on this circuit in the intermediate conditions, but it's still so treacherous out there. Verstappen getting away a little bit from the McLarens in the second sector. Russell and Albon very close together. Meanwhile, Hamilton struggling for pace again as Leclerc spins it. The Ferrari's round. He did a 360 spin, and Tsunoda crashes into Sebastian Vettel, and I think that is last race's race winner out of this one. It's a 6-car pile-up, and now Verstappen's in the gravel. What's happened here? Gasly's going slow. I think Gasly sent one down the inside of Max Verstappen at that corner and took them both wide. So controversy for the race lead, and so Lando Norris now will lead the race, I believe. Gasly down to P7, Verstappen down below the 2 Aston Martins now, but we need to look at replays of that incident with Leclerc. So he just drops the back end. It's a double 360 spin for him, and then that clout at the rear was Sebastian Vettel. So Vettel actually got taken out by Leclerc, not Tsunoda. Tsunoda actually tried to avoid Vettel in a T-bone situation. There's Leclerc, and that's so unfortunate. Vettel unsighted ahead of him. Piastri gets held up, so both Ferraris have a calamity in that situation because Leclerc spins it and Piastri gets caught up. So they go from what was P7 and 10 to down to, well, a lot lower than that. It's going to be P17 and 18 potentially. But Leclerc's still in this race, annoyingly, much to my annoyance as well, because that's frustrating to see our teammate's been taken out and the person who took him out is still in this race. But that entire incident on lap 2 has helped us out. We're now up into the top 10 in P8 to help the Aston Martins. Poor Chair, the rookie debut in P9, Stroll P10. We have a look at Gasly, who may be going a bit slow, but we get a tyre on the grass as we go from right to left to try and dummy him. And instead, well, we watch behind Stroll and Pourchaire having a ding-dong battle. Pourchaire makes a mistake, of course, still early days in his F1 career, so is to be expected, a few little mistakes here and there, but it's just such treacherous conditions that even I'm going to be making mistakes just like that, having to go opposite lock and catch the car in the corner on the exit because it's so slippery out there, and it's actually potentially drying as well, so it's kind of even worse because there's less standing water and maybe the inters are working less and less. But here's confirmation that Lando Norris then is leading the race from Russell in P2 now, Albon in P3, Hamilton P4, Perez in a very lofty P5, Sainz doing well 6th, and then there's a bit of a gap to Gasly in P7, who may be limping around with maybe a bit of damage, I don't know, from his contact with Verstappen and whatever happened there. Meanwhile, Verstappen is down in, well, P19, he's overtaken Bottas, but he's way down the order, so Gasly's definitely been the one who's come out better out of that incident. But you can see for myself, I'm going wide, left, right and centre, and I'm being pressurised by the Aston Martin of Stroll, and Perez is coming in, and my engineer has also called me in, and we saw Perez coming in ahead of us and thought, let's take the risk. If Perez is taking the gamble, surely we can as well. So this is going to be onto a set of medium tyres. I think Perez opting for the soft compound, but I reckon on the mediums we can have a bit more, a better chance of getting ahead in this race potentially, because those softs will wear out quicker. So we are going to get track position at some point in this race being on the medium compound. We won't lose too much in terms of the tyre heating because we've not chosen the hard compound tyre, but it's still very wet out there. I mean, nearly understeer off at turn 1, and I'm starting to think, what on earth was Perez and my engineer thinking? And Schumacher now is flying by us. He got a great exit, but we're using so much ERS, but we're unable to keep the car going and commit to that corner as much as Schumacher. And you can see just so much understeer versus Schumacher. The AI in these conditions on dry tyres, they are so overpowered, it would seem, in terms of the downforce and grip they still have. Versus myself, I'm still struggling. It's still far too wet for the player, but it's fine for the AI because Norris has come in, Russell as well, although Hamilton stays out along with Pierre Gasly. So a couple of cars still thinking it's wet enough for inters. The majority of the grid, though, are now actually going on to some form of dry tyre. Pourchaire continues on in the new Aston Martin car in P3. Leclerc as well on the Ferrari in P4, trying to maybe get some track position or just racing in clean air after that spin he had. But there is Norris then leading a whole gaggle of cars coming out of the pits, and here we come now down the main straight. We're ahead of Verstappen, but we're now behind Tsunoda, the likes of Magnussen and the Williams, so we've actually lost out massively by pitting that early for the dry compound. Yellow flags ahead, and Schumacher is in, having an engine failure, and we nearly get boxed in to having a crash with him because Tsunoda left me no room of where to go. It was either backing out of that or smashing into the rear of Schumacher. So far in this race, it just seems like the majority of things are just not going our way. That was so unfortunate where our car was placed versus Verstappen and Tsunoda.
Stand by, we see a problem our end and we're looking into
Oh god, and now another thing. Literally nothing is going our way. The only tiny glimmer of luck was the way we gained some positions with Leclerc's spin, but now the safety car is deployed for the second time in this race. I think maybe for Schumacher.
Okay, it's not good news, I'm afraid. Seems like an engine issue.
And now our team has told us we have an engine issue and it's not looking good, and they've not told me about a fix or anything, but I can't actually tell what's happened to our car. There's no issue with the fuel flow or the ERS deployment, So potentially that is just them telling me there's a general issue with the power unit. So that's a little bit concerning because we've got still about 2/3 of this Grand Prix to go. Norris leads the way. A lot of these cars on soft tyres like Russell, Hamilton, Gasly's in P4 then. So it's a very strong showing from McLaren and Mercedes right now under this second safety car. Sainz got ahead of Perez in the pit stop phases with Perez coming in earlier and losing a bit of time like I did. The two Aston Martins though, they're still up there in the top 10. I should have stayed out with them because they're P7 and 8. We would have been around there. Piastri P9, Ocon rounds out the top 10. But this is what happened to Albon into turn 1 as Hamilton, of all people. Of course it was Hamilton versus Albon. As Hamilton exited the pit lane, he broke Albon's front wing. So Albon would have been up there in the top 4, but he had his front wing taken off by the Mercedes car. And then this is why Leclerc's down the order. He was in P4, remember, staying out with Lando and Hamilton, but he had to serve a 5-second penalty for that incident with Sebastian Vettel. So a bit of justice paid to Leclerc. So it means now Leclerc and Albon are actually behind me in this train, even further back than my P15. And for company in P14 ahead of us, we've got Max Verstappen. We were snapping the heels of the Red Bull man on the exit, and we've actually got a good run potentially, but we are not close enough to make a move into turn 1, and then we get hit with a wash of understeer, dirty air potentially from the car head. But Schwartzman now in the Williams having a go at us, and this is the first signs of this engine power issue potentially, because Verstappen's now pulling away. Let's see how it goes in this next phase of the race once we settle down maybe and get some proper temperatures into these tyres. But Norris leads the way then still. He's got quite a commanding gap, 1.6 to Hamilton from Russell. So Hamilton's got ahead of George Russell in this all. Gasly, Sainz, Perez still the order, and then it's a swap from the Aston Martins as Stroll tries to take the position from his more junior teammate, poor chair. Stroll with a really lovely move as the two Astons are loving life in the top 10 right now. Had a Piastri and Verstappen's wide. Verstappen makes an error, and not for the first time in this season. Verstappen's really not having a great time so far in Season 3. To be fair, the whole Red Bull team aren't, because Albon's behind us, because Leclerc's there in P17 on the hard compound. I believe Albon's P18 on the hard compound. So those two trying to go long. Verstappen's on the softs though, so he's going to pit eventually before me. So we'll get track position on him and a load of other people, but we're sensing an overtake here. We've actually got a little bit of pace. We're overusing a lot of the ERS just to shoot it down the inside and get the position. And that's more out of spite than anything of just wanting to get a place, because we've been doing nothing but floundering and going backwards in this race. And Verstappen was a bit slow off that excursion off with some grass on his tyres. So I thought best to just try and get one position, maybe hold it as best we can. Perez is now in. So from that early pit stop Perez made, he now has to make an early pit stop to come on to another set of tyres. And now on lap 13 onto 14, a load of others onto new tyres. So this is where the track position's coming into play for the medium compound. We're up into P8, and it could be a few further positions still with Magnussen and Ocon on the softs ahead. My engineers are telling me to come in around lap 23 to 24, so I'm hoping in clean air we can use the medium compound to good effect. But the reality is we have Leclerc and Albon behind us, and even though we made that move on Verstappen, we still have some sort of engine issue, and this right here convinced me that we were slow on power. Leclerc just waltzes by me, pinches me, does well to pinch me in on the left-hander then to actually finish off the move. But then despite deploying ERS all the way down this straight, Albon still gets through down the inside. And then even in the corners, it's not even engine power. Even in the corners, the way this car is moving about is just so odd. And I genuinely felt like this car was broken. Hamilton now is coming through. He's already made his pit stop onto a fresh set of mediums, but we're going to fight him just out of pure spite of obviously losing the championship to him in such a painful manner at Abu Dhabi. Level on points, winning it on number of wins. Russell barges his way by and bullies us off the racing line to get up into P7. We nearly go wide and hit the wall as Hamilton comes chasing after again. Sainz in there as well in the Haas. It may be 3 wide. We're going to back out of that. Sainz locks up and we're able to thread the car through like a needle through haystack. Hamilton now on the outside with a much better exit off turn 1. Gets ahead with DRS, but we're going to make the lunge from left to right. Hamilton locks up and he's going to be taken wide, but there goes Carlos Sainz down the inside to mug us both off, and Sainz is up into P6 as we're too busy focused on Hamilton. Perez now behind us as well. Checo, he's going to fly by. That Alpine's got some great pace. We're still defending Hamilton, but then Lance Stroll comes through with the kamikaze dive, makes a bit of contact with Perez, but overtakes both myself and Lewis. Lewis still getting his nose in there, but just can't get by. Drogovic then sends one through in lap 17, and this is where you're seeing that there is clearly an issue. The Alfa Romeo is getting me so easily, and then I can't close back up as quick as you think we would in a straight line. Even with a good amount of tow and slipstream here, Hamilton is still right on my gearbox, but we are now forming a big train. Look at the mini-map. There are so many dots closing up off that corner. Hamilton's got to run on the left. We close the door, slam it shut. But a big train is indeed forming. We've got Piastri, Ocon, Magnussen all there for company. We're forming the biggest trolley train ever. And meanwhile, at the sharp end for the top 5 positions, Gasly trying to come back through and overtake Russell after that earlier incident he had with Max Verstappen. Russell holds strong and remains in P4. You had Perez having a go at Stroll and showing he's really loving this new lease of life in the Alpine team, up into P7 as we continue to try and keep as many cars behind us as we can. Mainly Hamilton on the right. It's a real good battle. We squeeze him to the right, pinch him in for the inside of the turn 1 and remain in P10. Poor Chair now may even have a go as he's pulled out on the left hand side in the Aston Martin, but look at the amount of cars we are holding up. That's how slow we are, and it's just ridiculous. We've not even made our pit stop yet. There needs to be some serious questions into what's happened this race. The two Williams are scrapping and they get taken wide by each other, and there's contact with Tsunoda. Verstappen also in the middle of that, somehow avoids all contact. He's done very well there, but Yuki Tsunoda is now out of this Grand Prix, and he's going to park it up on the left hand side, which is going to cause a virtual and then full course safety car, the FIA have thought. So that's a 3rd safety car in this one race around Albert Park, and this is our chance now to come in for a free pit stop onto the hard compound. Now, I know it says our tyres are worn, like it has the orange icon, but realistically, our engineers, the strategy was to come in around lap 20. So I don't think the performance is just down to tyres. From the get-go, when these tyres were fresh, I alluded to the fact the car was feeling weird and just wasn't working as I wanted it to. I had no confidence in any entry and exit and mid-apex of this of corners in this car. And then, like I said, it was very clear and apparent with Leclerc and Albon that we just have no straight line speed as well. So that engine issue is clearly still hampering us, but I don't know whether that engine issue is also affecting the general drivability of the engine and the car, therefore, and that's what's causing it, or whatever the case is. I think something is fundamentally broken with this car right now. Lap 20, 9 laps to go. We're down in P14. Verstappen's pit again. So we have at least one top car behind us, but we've got nothing to show for it yet. Still outside the top 10. But up ahead, I've been told under the safety car restart that Stroll has an issue with his car, so he's going to be slow. And on this exit on fresh soft tyres, remember, versus everyone ahead of us on mediums, they've been on those tyres for a few laps now. So we do have now a bit of grip advantage and pace versus this same Alfa Romeo that dive bombed us right here on this right-hander. We're now pushing him through this corner because Stroll is going so slow. Look at the mini-map. The pace difference is very apparent. So now we're coming through using a lot of ERS battery to power by Drogovic, to power by Lance Stroll, maybe on the outside. Oh, the Canadian gives us a good old squeeze and does well to defend but eventually the overwhelming speed is going to be enough for us to get through on the left-hand side. But to say he's got an issue, you can see we're not really even going past him very easily. I've had to make a very difficult overtake around the outside of a car that has an issue, so that just kind of shows you that we definitely have an issue of our own. But meanwhile, back at the sharp end, lap 22, Lando Norris leads this race, but he's on soft tyres that he's been on since he came onto them off intermediates. So after so long on those softs, he finally comes in for a second pit stop, a dry second pit stop, I must say, because of course all these guys have made a second pit stop, or in the case of Leclerc and Albon, they've not, because they're on a set of hard tyres. After all the chaos that Leclerc caused in lap 2 by doing a 360 spin in the wet, Albon's front wing breakage on Lewis's rear end, these two have done a one-stop effectively this entire race, intermediates to hards, and they've both come through from the back of the grid, you know, P17 and 18 at one point, to now be first and second, because everyone else has had to make an extra pit stop off the soft tyres onto a set of mediums, even myself from mediums to soft, so we've just done the reverse of what everyone else has done. We found ourselves now in P10 though, because Lando Norris has gone all the way down to about P14 or 15, but despite being in P10, it is not happy days right now, because we have no pace. Initially, I was pulling away from Drogovic. The gap was about 1.5. Now he's back under our rear wing. We're so far off Ocon in P9. And now we make a mistake. The car just gives away. And that's not even, like, I was quite smooth on throttle, I feel. And the car just gave up halfway through the corner. Something is broken with this car. I'm convinced of it. The car shouldn't be letting go on the rear end just randomly through that corner. We didn't even compromise our line. I wasn't that aggressive on throttle. And then this is the final take of it. Look at this understeer. Something's wrong. Something's up. I don't know whether it's the floor. It wasn't the tyres from the... It wasn't the tyre temperatures from the spin I had, because by that point in the lap, my tyre temps have gone back down to a normal region. But there's no damage indicated on heads-up display on the floor, so that's why I'm just scratching my head of what's happened here. And is it genuinely just this power unit issue? And for that reason, I mean, there's nothing to fight for now with that spinning off. So we just pull in, and we're retiring the car. That's it. It's game over. Double DNF for our team following such a fantastic Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So frustrating, but the show goes on and the race goes on. Leclerc pressurized by Albon for P1, well within 1 second. Then bit of a gap to Russell, who now locks up. Russell locks up and invites the McLaren through, and Pierre Gasly could be on now for a podium finally with McLaren after struggling so much and failing to score a single point with McLaren so far in his debut for the team. He's now up into P3, Russell down to P4 ahead of Sainz, Perez, Hamilton, Piastri, Ocon in P9, Verstappen P10 as they go on to the last lap of the Grand Prix. Albon still trying to chase after Leclerc to do anything, and Hamilton has some smoke coming out the back of his car, and for the second time in a row, Hamilton, the reigning champion, is out of a race. And, you know, my oh my, last season's championship contenders, all three of us not having a great time with Verstappen down in P9. But meanwhile, absolutely biblical scenes going on with Charles Leclerc rounding the final corner, having had 2 360 spins on lap 2. He's coming through to win the Australian Grand Prix. Ferrari make it 2 wins out of the first 3 races. Unbelievable.
Another superb Australian Grand Prix comes to an end then, and it's a thoroughly deserved victory. Natalie Pinkham, how do you think they were able to set themselves apart today?
Staying out of trouble was probably the most important factor here. In a race where half the field weren't classified at the checkered flag, you were able to guarantee a good result by keeping the car running. With their pace and a decent strategy as well, I don't think the race was ever really in doubt.
Looking at the podium, you can see that red suit familiar to fans across the globe. A world-class win for a world-class team. Ferrari do it again.
So far this season has thrown up some shocking results. Piastri and Leclerc winning race 1 and race 3. If you told me that at the end of last season, I would have been scoffing in your face because of where they were last season, but they've worked hard as a team, and genuinely, I know Leclerc made the mistake, but genuinely Ferrari, actually a bit of a strategic masterclass today, going onto hard tyres, following that spin, and just going to the end. Albon did the same as well. Of course, remember, Albon actually made 2 pit stops for dries, because he went onto softs, then had his front wing brake off Hamilton, then went onto hard tyres. So, from the get-go, Ferrari and Leclerc were the only team and driver to think about doing the audacious just 1 stop to the end on hards, and it's paid out for them, and they've won the 2nd race in 3 at the start of this season. And so it means in the standings, well, Albon leads the way, but by only 1 point now to Leclerc. Piastri still in the top 4 in the championship. Vettel's still there in P3 despite the DNF today, so that's still pretty good for him. But look at where we are, P12, 29 points off P1 already, and maybe more pain to come, of course, because our team is still not out of debt. We're still not going to have any upgrades for at least an episode or 2, you'd say, and these other teams are just going to continue to upgrade potentially. So this is worrying times. We need to bounce back with some really big damage limitation next episode, because we're already quite some ways off there in the Constructors Ferrari lead. Unbelievable stuff. What a mega and messy 3rd episode this was of Season 3. This season so far has been insane. Guys, if you have enjoyed it, hit the like button. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you're around here, then do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.